Hello, and welcome to the Mio on MMA podcast. I am Mio, and we're going over the upcoming UFC fight night. Is this one in Vegas? I should have looked before I started recording. No. Okay. Louisville, Kentucky. All right. The KFC Yum Center. Interesting name. Pretty good fight card, honestly. We got Jared Cannonier, Nassourdine Imavov in the main event, which is a pretty relevant fight. Dominic Reyes versus Dustin Jacoby is a bit of a disappointing, depressing co-main event, but there's some other stuff on here. Like, I'm expecting Julian Marquez, Zach Reese to be quite good. I'm intrigued by Punahele Soriano's drop to 170, where he fights Miguel Baeza. Thiago Moises versus Ludwig Klein should be a pretty good fight. Charles Radke versus Carlos Pratis has a very, very dark part to it, but also a very positive part to it. and further on down, Andrew Lee versus Montana De La Rosa. A fairly big fan of Montana De La Rosa, so always happy to see her on a card. Daniel Marcos versus John Castaneda is probably my personal favorite fight on the card. And then also Cody Stamann versus Taylor Lapilus. And it might be a really good fight. It might not be. But Pooja Tomar versus High-End Amanda should be something I'm looking forward to. We'll see whether it's actually something worthwhile, because there is some questions about that. But I'm always happy when one of my favorite like atomweight fighters is fighting at strawweight and is fighting someone else who's probably an atomweight, because it means that the chances that they just get bullied are relatively low, and that's nice. But anyways, that's your card, and we're going to dive into it. Now, before we get really into this, though, I do have to say, two things. Number one, I'm not going to be editing the audio on this one. In order to get it up at an appropriate time, it's just going to go up raw. And that could mean that there's going to be a lot of and ums and so on. So I do apologize for that. But such is the schedule right now, how it is for me. That being said, the other thing is my usual thing, which is I am going to be talking about betting on this card. But MMA betting should not be viewed as a path to financial freedom. It should not be something that you're putting 20, 30, 40 grand, whatever constitutes a lot of money for you. Don't do it. There you go. Let's roll in here. Main event, Jared Cannonier versus Nassourdine Imavov. The only concern I have here really is Jared Cannonier's age. He is 40 years old, which at any weight class is pretty old. I mean, if you think about this for a moment here, and I was thinking about this with Stipe Miocic the other day, because there's always the conversation about Stipe getting a title shot against John Jones. Legacy, blah, blah, blah. How dare you disrespect Stipe? And I'm a big Stipe fan, but let's be real here. He's in his 40s. He walks like he's in his 50s. That fight shouldn't be happening. And it's kind of the same thing here that, like, if you exclude Randy Couture and Dan Henderson, that's about it. Everyone else in their 40s just is not a top-end fighter. That being said, Jared Cannonier is coming off one of his best performances of all time against Marvin Vettori, where he went out there and he beat Marvin Vettori up. He did to Marvin Vettori things that I don't think we've seen anyone else do. Like, Marvin Vettori is a guy who had a very, very close fight with Izzy Adesanya multiple times. Like, don't get me wrong, last time Vettori fought Adesanya, there is no way to score that fight for Vettori, but it was a competitive fight. So the fact that Cannonier just went out there and was like, and just wreck shop on him, like how he didn't finish him is kind of like an amazing and a testament to Vettori's incredible toughness. But at the end of the day, it was an incredible performance. And like, I've never had a lot of faith in Nassourdine Imavov. I don't have the most respect for respect is the wrong word. Faith in Cannonier, because outside of that fight with Vettori, there's a lot of like very, very mid performances, very close fights, I guess, but he is a physical specimen. And the only people at 185 he's lost to are Adesanya and Robert Whittaker. And yes, the Adesanya fight was terrible. But this is a guy who has beaten Sean Strickland, who has beaten Derek Brunson, Kelvin Gastelum, Jack Hermanson, Anderson Silva. That one admittedly doesn't mean much. David Branch. And I've got to take him here because Imavov is a guy who is very, very big. Don't get me wrong. He's 6'3". He's huge, 75 inches, but actually is at a reach disadvantage against Cannonier. And he's a guy who either needs to be uncontested at range or be able to bully you in the clinch, be able to just kind of crush you with forward pressure and his raw physicality. I don't think he can do either. I don't think Cannonier is going to let him be safe at range. And I don't think Cannonier is crushable because no one, and I'm including like 205ers and 265ers, have ever managed to do that to Cannonier without just being absolutely massive. Like, I want to say that at heavyweight, Cannonier never was just like completely crushed. I could be wrong. I'm looking at his record right now, but like his losses are to Sean Jordan, Glover Teixeira, Jan Blachowicz, Dominic Reyes before he was ruined, and the aforementioned two at 185 that I mentioned. There's no one who's just like kind of bullied him. Like people have tried, Nick Rourke, Ian Kudalaba, Tony Lopez to a certain degree, and these guys all failed. And at the end of the day, I just can't see Imavov doing that. Don't get me wrong, Imavov has the physical tools to do this, and he's 12 years younger. But at the same time, assuming Cannonier doesn't have a steep drop off because he's 40, I don't actually really know what a Imavov fight looks like in terms of win. He's not a particularly high fight IQ fighter. In fact, he makes a lot of terrible decisions in fights. And Cannonier, I don't know. Cannonier's just better. It's just that age that gives me like, a pause. I will go with the decision because Imavov is pretty goddamn durable. So I will say Cannonier by decision. Imavov is the favorite, minus 120 to minus 128. Cannonier is plus 100 to plus 105. I'll probably bet on Cannonier at those odds because he's 40. But you give me him at underdog odds against somebody who's like not a champion, not an absolute elite fighter, and Imavov is not. I'm going to take that. Dominic Reyes versus Dustin Jacoby. I don't have a lot to say about this fight. At the end of the day, Jacoby's not the most powerful hitter. He's not the biggest hitter in the world, but he is a very talented striker. And for 205 is really, really technical. He's got reasonably fast hands. He's got good game planning. He makes generally fairly decent decisions. There are some exceptions. He tried to wrestle with Alonso Metafield, I think it was, for prolonged stretches of that fight, and he ended up losing. But Reyes is just he's a broken man. He's 34 years old, which is not that old, but his chin appears to be gone. He's not been himself since he lost to John Jones, and a lot of people want to credit John Jones with that. I don't think so. I think being that close and in many people's eyes winning the UFC 205-pound title and then being told no, I think that's what broke him. I don't think it's anything about Jones's performance or whatever, because I don't even know what that would be. Like, it's not like Jones did something amazing to him. Like, he lost to him. I'm sorry. I know John Jones on paper beat Dominic Reyes, but like he lost that fight. And now he's just done. I don't know what it is, because he just suddenly became chinny. And it wasn't even like he'd been in like a bunch of wars or whatever. But like his ability to absorb strikes is not there. His physicality appears to be in decline, which makes sense, again, at the age he's at. And I've got to take Jacoby by TKO. Jacoby is a minus 225 to minus 250 favorite. Reyes plus 185 to plus 200. Raul Rosas Jr. versus Ricky Turcios is a fight that I broke down before, and I haven't changed my mind here. At the end of the day, Ricky Turcios is takedownable. Don't get me wrong. Brady Hiestand did it 6 times. Kevin Natividad 7 times. It can happen. But he scrambles incredibly well. You'll note that he won both of those fights. The fights that he loses are guys who actually don't really need to wrestle. And Raul Rosas Jr. absolutely needs to wrestle him. Absolutely needs to have top control. Absolutely needs to be able to out-scramble him. And I don't think you can do that. Now, Rosas Jr. is at the point where he's 19 years old. Sudden changes, sudden advancements can absolutely happen. I don't believe that's what's happening here, because outside of his age, there's nothing going on that suggests that he is getting better. There's nothing that is making that next step in any of his fights. And I kind of feel like this is a very similar fight to, I'm blanking on his name. The Rufus Sport guy who recently beat Isaac Dolgarian. Is it Christian Rodriguez? It might be Christian Rodriguez. Anyways, that fight that Rosas lost, this feels a lot like that, just without like as good of striking. But like, I don't think you need to be a particularly good striker to break down Rosas on the feet because he's a pretty bad striker. Anyways, I'm going with Tercios by decision. I'm ready to be wrong. I'm kind of hoping to be wrong because I don't think Tercios has any like upside. He's 31 years old. He is what he is going to be, which is a low end action fighter in the UFC, maybe. And even then, he has those fights with like Ayman Zahabi that are terrible. So even that's not a guarantee. And Rosas has got upside. So like, I kind of hope to be wrong, but I don't think I am. And I'm not surprised Rosas is a minus 218 to minus 250 favorite. After all, he is Dana White's baby boy. Dana White really has a ridiculous impact on betting lines. And Tercios plus 180 to plus 200. I will probably be betting on Tercios. I'm staying away from the Jacoby Reyes fight. Bruno Ferreira versus Dustin Stolfus. Dustin Stolfus is bad. That's it. Like he's got some wrestling skill. He's got some strength, but he is slow-footed, not very athletic. His stand-up is pretty bad. He got absolutely wrecked by Abus Magomedov. Bruno Ferreira is a really, really unformed talent, but like he is, and is small for 185. Actually, in both these cases, honestly, they both feel like welterweights. But anyways, Bruno Ferreira is really, really powerful. And yes, he's not structured or whatever, but like neither is Abus Magomedov. Neither is a lot of the people that have beaten Dustin Stolfus, whose like biggest claim to fame is beating Joe Pyfer by injury. This is a weird matchup because like Ferreira is coming off a win against Phil Haas, who is really fragile, but like he'd also beaten Gregory Rodriguez before that. Like I know he lost to Nursultan Ruziboev in the meantime, but like Nursultan Ruziboev is a really, really weird fighter. Like you're not going to replicate that with anyone else. So like this feels like a squash match. Ferreira by TKO. That's it. I don't really like to pick a guy as unstructured as Ferreira, but like there's just not really anything to Stolfus that I think actually works. Don't get me wrong, Stolfus has managed to pick up a couple of wins in the UFC, and that is, in my opinion, just kind of an indictment of those guys that he's beaten. Dwight Grant comes to mind, Punahele Soriano, obviously. But like he was handled pretty easily by Kyle Daukaus, by Rodolfo Vieira, by Gerald Mearshart, by Abus Magomedov. He's not long for this. It's no hate. Like, go out there and chase your dream, but like I'm not going to pick you. Bruno Ferreira minus 265 to minus 285, 286, pardon me. And Stolfus plus 210 to plus 225. I'd probably ponder putting Ferreira into a parlay at that point. Julian Marquez versus Zach Reese. This is a fun fight, but it's a fight that like, and these next two fights are like kind of same in this regard. I have no faith in either guy to win. Zach Reese is a can crusher. Now he's big enough, athletic enough, and has enough like ideas and decision making that I do think that he can be more than that. That like he can beat people who are not cans. But Julian Marquez is a guy that is way better than anyone that he's beaten. Way more athletic, way more technical. And that's saying something because he's an absolute mess of a technician. And that's why I don't trust him. But yeah, I kind of need to see Zach Reese beat someone who's not a cam before I pick him to do it. And that's why I'm picking Marquez by TKO or by submission because he's got good sub game. Reese can take some really bad risks and give out his neck. And he's never been subbed, but I think it's coming. And then Marquez can also TKO someone because he's got the power. He's got the wildness. He's got the craziness. He's got the insane chaos. And I don't think Reese can actually really control a fight. But like, dude is 6'4", 77-inch reach. Going into this one, he's 2 inches taller, 5 inches longer. That's exceptional. But like, he doesn't have a range game. Like, he marches you down and kind of crushes you in the clinch at the best of times, or hits you really, really hard in the pocket. So I have hopes for Reese. I have ideas for Reese, but I do have to see him win against a UFC caliber fighter before I actually do it. I am, I guess, really turned off by the fact that he lost to Cody Bernrich. Anyways, Marquez is a minus 132 to minus 150 favorite. Reese is plus 106 to plus 120. Not betting on Marquez at plus or at minus odds. I'm not betting at Reese at those odds either, so staying away from it. Punahele Soriano versus Miguel Baeza. Kind of the same thing here. We got Soriano 1-5 in his last 5, but he's coming down to 170, which I think he'll fit better because he's 5'11". And Baeza's on a 3-fight losing streak. And don't get me wrong, the talent is very good that Baeza's lost to. Andre Fiallo, Chaos Williams, and Santiago Ponzinibbio, except for Fiallo, who is out of the UFC at this point. But they they felt very indicative of like problems. He kind of just melted at times against them and got finished by 2 of them. So I am going to go with Soriano by TKO. His weakness has historically been people who bring a wrestling game to him. And don't get me wrong, Baeza can grapple. But I'm not really sure if Baeza's really got any kind of like obvious takedown performance, really. He's going to be smaller than the guys that Soriano's used to fighting, weaker than the guys that Soriano's used to fighting, and he's just not really a wrestler in his own right. There was a lot of hype on him at one point, but I do think that he's fundamentally broken, kind of in a similar way to Dominic Reyes. So I'm going with Soriano by TKO. This could go either way. This should be a messy fight that should entertain. And hopefully on the outside, the winner looks like he's solved some problems that both of these guys definitely have. Baeza's minus 192 to minus 205. Soriano plus 154 to plus 170. Again, it's basically just going on like Soriano going down in weight and trying to fix some things and maybe trying to figure out what's going on wrong. Whereas there's nothing about Baeza, who's been away for 2 years, that really inspires a lot of faith because that suggests injuries in addition to problems. So, I don't know. We'll see. I guess he could come back and be like Mickey Gall and just look kind of fixed. But I doubt it. Also, he's with the MMA Masters. I just have no faith in that gym. Thiago, don't get me wrong. They're producing a lot of good fighters, but like they're producing good athletes versus like people who have like corrected problems and figured things out. That's the problem. I actually had this with, of course, the Valentina Shevchenko don't drink water during training thing. And people are trying to defend it, being like, she was a champion. Of course it works. Her gym's genius for that. They got her to the belt. And it's like, the gym has done nothing with no one else. And she also does like with Tiger Muay Thai, who do water breaks. Like that's a her thing, and her coach slash father, not father-in-law, brother-in-law slash father figure. It's a bit weird. But anyways, coming up with those ideas, and it hasn't really worked with anyone else. Like, what has her sister done despite being like a massive person for the weight class? Pretty much nothing. What has any of her teammates done? Nothing. I don't think they even have anyone not named Shevchenko that's in the UFC. And that's kind of the thing, is that like sometimes the process that makes a fighter is really not responsible for the fighter, and it's just natural talent, and that's Valentina Shevchenko, and that's what MMA Masters tends to produce. Thiago Moises versus Ludwig Klein. Ludwig Klein is still a guy who I think should be at featherweight, but hey, he's been doing well. He's had a 5-fight unbeaten streak. There's a weird draw in there with Jai Herbert, and he's fighting Thiago Moises. The problem here, though, is that I don't think we're looking at the same type of matchups that he's been winning, because Klein has been winning predominantly against people who are largely going to stand and bang with him and who really don't have a way of bringing it to the ground. And Thiago Moises does have that. He's got a reasonably good defensive striking game that leads to takedowns, mostly from the clinch. And he's a guy who, you look at who he's lost to, and it's seriously impressive. It's Benoit Saint Denis, Hol Alvarez, and Islam Makhachev, and then you're back to like 4+ years ago. So you're giving Moises a guy smaller than him, or at least shorter than him. Granted, Klein does have those weirdly long arms. He's not one of those 5'7" guys with a 72.5-inch reach. For comparison purposes, he is like 4 inches shorter than me and has a longer reach. It's kind of creepy. But at the end of the day, I do have to pick Moises to just be able to pressure him and take him down. Like, it's not like Moises is a bad striker. He's got decent low kicks. He's got a decent boxing game. Klein is creative and can be very dangerous. He does hit hard and everything. But it's not like he's been like a knockout artist particularly. I mean, if we look at the run that we're talking about, this 5-fight unbeaten streak that he's on, you have the draw with Jai Herbert, but you also have a decision win against Ignacio Bahamondes, against Mason Jones, Devontae Smith. The only guy he's finished is AJ Cunningham. AJ Cunningham is bad. Like, AJ Cunningham is a guy who has like the physical building blocks of a decent fighter and none of the coaching. So, yeah, I kind of look at this as and also, realistically, you look at the grappling exchanges with Klein. Again, it's the loss to Nate Landwehr. And I know Nate Landwehr is not really considered to be like a grappler first. Obviously, he's predominantly a striker. But like, when it went to the ground, Klein was outgunned. And then, it's Mason Jones, who's not in the UFC anymore. So I'm going to go with Thiago Moises. And I'm a little surprised that he's an underdog at plus 100 to plus 110. Klein is minus 120 to minus 135. I do think it goes the distance. I do think it goes the decision, but still, there you go. Carlos Bratis versus Charles Radke. This could be a really, really fun fight. it could also be terrible because it's a fun fight if Radke does what he likes to do, which is be like kind of a pocket power puncher and do his thing. Because then Pratis just gets to kind of stand and pick him apart and win. But Radke is one of those guys who's like, he's bizarrely good at like clinch wrestling and counter wrestling and doing that kind of thing. Not great at it, mind you. I'm not saying that he's going places with this, but like the best part of his game is a part of the game that he doesn't want to use. And Pratis is very, very thin. Very, very bullyable, I think. So if Radke can overcome his macho needs to not be gay, he will have a path to victory. I just don't think he will, and I think Pratis will knock him out. I was a little bit disappointed to see that Pratis is a minus 225 to minus 240 favorite, and Radke's plus 180 to plus 200, because Radke's got a fan base that is, let's just say, political or cultural in nature, and that tends to lead to some weird odds. I remember looking at the fight with Gilbert Urbina, which he did end up winning, so they ended up being right. But like going into that fight, there was no reason to believe that Charles Radke should actually beat Gilbert Urbina. I know he ended up doing it, so it's a bad example. But it was like one of those things where it's like, he's not very good. And I still have to go with he's not very good. But we'll see, I guess. I do have Pratis by TKO because he is a finisher and Radke can't be finished. Brad Katona versus Jesse Butler. This is the biggest favorite on the night. Brad Katona minus 599 to minus 650, and Butler plus 400 plus 460. Don't get me wrong, that's too wide. Katona's not a finisher, and anyone who's not a finisher should not be that kind of favorite. But at the end of the day, I don't know what Butler does better. Is he a better grappler? No. Is he a better striker? No, he's a pretty bad striker, actually. Is he a better wrestler? No, not really. He's bigger. He's coming down from 155 to 135. Now, granted, he was a featherweight for a long, long time. So this is not a 2 weight class jump. He just kind of took a fight with Jim Miller, I think on short notice, and fought at 155. Now he's down to 135. Bit of a weird move still. You're 5'10". I'm not really sure if this weight cut's going to go well for you, but hey. At the end of the day, Brad Katona should be the better striker, should put the pace on him, is a pretty decent counter grappler and grappler himself. Like, he's very safe. And the guys who have beaten him are actually quite good. I mean, he did lose to Garrett Armfield in a fight that some people had him winning. I don't remember if I had a particularly strong view of it myself. I didn't on the rewatch, but I might have live. But like, it's Hunter Azure, Merab Dvalishvili, and Garrett Armfield. That's pretty good. That's a list of like pretty good athletes. Admittedly a bit raw in the case of Hunter Azure, and admittedly a bit one-dimensional in the case of Merab Dvalishvili, and admittedly a bit weirdly structured in Garrett Armfield's case. But like, they're good fighters. Whereas, Jesse Butler reminds me a lot more of Jay Cusinello or Matthew Lopez or I guess those are the only two. Oh, Cody Gibson. Cody Gibson would be another example of like a super big guy, and that's predominantly what he does. So I got Katona by decision. Not betting on it because it's way, way, way too wide. Andrew Lee versus Montana De La Rosa. This is a rematch from 2019, I want to say. I should have written down when their first fight was. I should have done that. But these are two. Oh, yeah, there it is. I did write it down. 2019. I've got it going kind of the same way. Like, don't get me wrong. Andrew Lee is getting older, 35 years old, which, again, is old for, the weight class. And Montana De La Rosa is the younger fighter at 29 years old. But, like, Lee's 4-fight losing streak, obviously it shows problems, but like, it's Vivi Araujo, Macy Barber, Natalia Silva, and Miranda Maverick. They are all way better athletes than Montana De La Rosa. And Montana De La Rosa is on a 3-fight losing streak of her own to Macy Barber, Tatiana Suarez, and JJ Aldridge. If you want to like, kind of ad hoc someone to someone, like Andrea Lee and Aldridge are way closer to being together than Montana De La Rosa is to the 4 people who've beaten Andrea Lee. The first fight saw De La Rosa be able to score some takedowns, but she couldn't hold her down. I expect that to still be the case. Lee is very, very hard to hold down. And then on the feet, Lee was able to win. And Lee, I think, is still the better technical striker than Montana De La Rosa. I think Montana De La Rosa is at a gym that isn't really producing the right kind of striker for her. I've kind of noticed like they try to make this like quick hands approach that she just does not have. Like, that's That's the problem. But anyways, she did beat Ariane Lipski before this 3-fight losing streak. So, that's a fight that I guess you could ad hoc lean on to. I've got Lee by decision. She is the favorite, -150 to -163. Montana Del Rosa is +122 to +140. I'm not betting on a line that close between these two. And at the end of the day, we'll probably get something racist out of Angela Lee's corner. Actually, we probably won't. She's fighting a white girl. But De La Rosa is a Spanish last name. There might be a race trader, maybe. I don't know. Getting away from that. Daniel Marcos versus John Castaneda. This is a fun fight. I was on the Daniel Marcos bandwagon quite early. Like, people were like questioning my thoughts that he could beat like Davey Grant and so on. Although I do think he lost to Davey Grant. That being said, he's got a good low kick game. He fights at a good pace. He fights with good combinations. He can fight behind a jab. He can do a lot of things. John Castaneda is a really, really good test. I like him. He's a good counterpuncher. He can mix in the wrestling a little bit. Seems to always be very, very, very well game plan, well schooled to take advantages of the weaknesses of their opponent. But I'm gonna go with Marcos. Maybe it's just this feel good thing that I'm loving the Peruvian and / the less traditional South American countries making an impact in MMA, like outside of Brazil, like Argentina is coming on strong, Peru's coming on strong, even like Venezuela and Ecuador are coming on strong. So I am going to go with Marcos. Maybe it's just that thing. Hopefully this is not the mess that was the Arichi Lang fight, because that was terrible. I don't need to see that many ball shots. But yeah, I got Marcos to win it. But I would not be surprised if Castaneda proves to be too much. Marcos is a -115 to -122 favorite. Castaneda +100 to -105. I didn't say a lot about the fight, but it's going to be a good fight, I think. You never know, but I do think. Eduardo Mora versus Denise Gomes, the classic striker versus grappler approach here. Mora is probably going to miss weight. That's my actual prediction, that this fight falls apart on the scales. Because Mora weighed in 119 in her last fight. I am stunned that she's getting booked at 115 again. Lady, you are 5'6" and thick. You are flyweight. But anyways, Gomes is tiny, and granted, she's never been submitted, so I guess that's a good thing. But she's been out wrestled by Angela Hill and by, who was it? Luma Lubumi. They both managed to score takedowns on her, and they're not the takedown artist, or at least not the physical presence that Eduardo Mora is. So I've got Eduardo Mora by submission, assuming this fight actually happens after she misses weight and Gomes doesn't just say, you know what, screw this, I'm not taking the fight. Mora is the favorite, -184 to -200. Gomes is +142 to +165. I'm just always going to favor a grappler and a striker-grappler matchup when the size mismatch is this big. Cody Stamann versus Taylor Lapilus. I am looking forward to this fight. I like Cody Stamann. I know he's not a finisher. I know he's not super exciting. But, for a guy who is, despite looking bricked up and everything and looking like an athlete, not really much of an athlete. There's not a lot of speed. There's not a lot of explosiveness to him. That's why he doesn't finish people. He relies on strength and just good fundamental wrestle boxer stuff. And he's going in there with Taylor Lapilus. Taylor Lapilus is a good kicker. Bit of an unorthodox style in that regard. Very back foot heavy. Very kick heavy. Gonna let Stamann come to him. Gonna let Stamann pressure. But Lapilus is pretty hard to take down. Pretty athletic guy himself. He's a stud. And despite the fact that I don't really love the style that Lapilus has put together, I've never felt really good about back foot kicking games. Just the history in MMA of them working out at a high level is quite limited. But I do have to go with Lapilus to win by decision here. He is a -260 to -275 favorite. Stamann +196 to +225. And then to open up the night, we have basically an atomweight fight. Masquerading as a strawweight fight. Pooja Tomar versus Hyatt Amanda. I might be getting Pooja Tomar's name incorrect. My apologies. I've seen it pronounced a couple different ways in the fights I was watching, and I don't know which one to trust because none of them were in India. So I don't have that. I don't have that advantage. She's Tomar is an Indian wushu practitioner, and that's kind of important because India is a regional scene that has yet to produce anyone particularly good, and I really, really doubt that it will be a female first. And at the same time, wushu is also a very, very hit and miss martial art. She's lost all of her big fights. They're to good fighters, don't get me wrong. They're like Stamp Fairtex and Jin Radzawan, the Shadow Cat. and Tiffany Teo, who is not a great fighter, but like is one of those weird physical attributes of like being, super tall, super long. Not that long, I guess, only like 69-inch reach, but still 70-inch reach at 115 is still pretty big. But anyways, she's been groundable before. She's been takedownable before. Hein Amanda is actually a pretty good takedown artist. She really struggles against people who she can't get to the ground. See the Toledo Alan Carr fight where Alan Carr wanted to grapple with her and she didn't really have answers for that. But like, and I guess you could say the Denise Gomes fight that she lost as well. But pretty much everyone else that has beaten her, I want to say, I'm pulling up their pages right now, but I feel like they're all just much bigger than her. Yeah. Alexia Thanara is much larger. Edna Oliveira. Okay, Edna Oliveira, I guess, is of a similar size. She beat her back in 2020. Okay, so not that long ago. Shido Brazil fight. I guess that's concerning. And then Isabella Batua, who is quite a bit bigger. Lindsay Garbrandt or Garbat, who's a Canadian fighter who always looks kind of freakishly ripped because she's cutting too much weight. And then another random Brazilian who is, again, looking a little bit bigger than her. Anyways, what I'm getting at here is that Hein Amanda should be able to take down Puja Tomar and do her thing. Make it a new grappling fight. She's a capable striker as well. She has got the reach advantage, the height advantage, although probably not the size advantage. And again, I would love it if we just did an atomweight division for both of these ladies because they're going to run into fights that they lose just because they're not big enough over the long term. And that includes like Alan Carr, who I talked about before. She's going to have a similar problem. Anyways, I've got Amanda by submission. She is the minus 335 to minus 375 favorite. Tomar is plus 250 to plus 295. People have been hyping on that line as if that's a really good line to bet on. And I guess I'll just share that. I don't think so. I don't know what her winning looks like. She's not for MMA purposes a particularly good striker, and her wins are against very low level competition. Like if you just look at the records of her wins: 0-0, 0-0, 0-1, 5-3, 6-8, 2-1, 0-0, and then 5-2-1. Anastasia, I'm gonna try Fiovanova at Matrix Fight Night 12. That's like her only good one, but Fiovanova is another one who's like lost to anyone with any kind of experience outside of a 7-1 Chinese fighter that she went to decision with. So yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is the beginning of an Indian like invasion of the women's MMA ranks, but I don't think so. I don't think so. I've seen this girl compete and won a couple of times, and I understand that she's fought good fighters. Like Shadowcat is a good fighter. Stamp Fairtex is a very good fighter, is a physical force. But she got wrecked in all of those fights. And I have not seen her in victory do something. Like her most notable win is B Win, who I only really even remember because she was on Survivor. Anyways, there you go. That's the fight card. Check the links down below. I'm sorry for the sound quality if it's particularly bad. This was a little bit rushed. You can check out my social media, my video gaming stuff down below. I'll be streaming Mutant League Football tonight, and you can have a very, very lovely evening.